Hello everyone and welcome back to theCUBE's live coverage of UiPath Fusion 2025. I'm your host, Rebecca Knight, alongside Dave Vellante, my co-host and analyst. We have with us Erik Brynjolfsson, who is the Jerry Yang and Akiko Yamazaki Professor. You got a long title, so bear with me here. Senior Fellow at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI and the Director of the Stanford Digital Economy Lab at Stanford. Welcome, Erik.
Good to be here.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure having you on. And we're going to be talking about you are giving a talk, I should tease the talk, giving a talk later today.
Yeah, just in like an hour or so, yeah.
Okay, so I want to hear what you're going to be talking about on the main stage, but let's go back and talk about this idea of a productivity J-curve, which you have coined this term that describes the lag between adopting breakthrough technology and when we start to see real economic impact. Can you describe this J-curve in the context of AI and what we're seeing right now?
Sure. Well, back when I was a young student in Boston, where I guess, I think we first met over there, I was working with Bob Solow, the Nobel Prize winner, and he pointed out that the computer age was everywhere, but except the productivity statistics. So he asked me to look into this, and one of the things we saw was that all these companies were investing in these like really amazing technologies, but nothing very valuable was coming out. And then later, as we know, like in 1995, things started really taking off. And so I did some research, and the same pattern happened with lots of earlier technologies. With electricity, it was like 30 years, in fact, before you had a big boom. The steam engine. And so when I analyze it, what we see is that these cool technologies, to really get the benefit of them, you have to rethink your business processes, you have to invest in human capital, training, and so forth. And all that takes time and energy, and while you're doing that, there's not a lot of new output. So you've got more input, not a lot of output. By definition, that's lower productivity. But then once you figure that out, things really take off. So to me, it kind of looks like a J, and we plotted, we did a paper in the American Economic Journal about that to kind of work out the math of it. And now we're seeing, I think, the same thing with AI.
So how similar are the patterns? Because I was doing some research recently, and it seems like since World War II, I think there's only been really two like a nearly decade-long sustained productivity booms, the manufacturing boom in the 50s and 60s, and of course the PC productivity boom, which felt like it was kind of organic. Those processes that changed were sort of from the ground up. And so, to me, you're the productivity alpha. And I'm curious as to how you see this one playing up. Last year I think you said you'd be disappointed if AI doesn't drive 3 to 4 points of productivity increases.
Well, that's how much it did, exactly. In the internet era, productivity got up above 3%, and that's why we had a surplus, and it was really good times. It took a little while, like Bob Solow pointed out, and we showed, but once people figured it out, it really took off. I think this one's going to be even bigger, but let's go back to the internet and think about what happened. When Bezos looked at a bookstore and said, hey, we're going to automate and computerize this, he didn't say, we're going to take a robot and put it where the cashier is and take the labor out. That would have been a very boring, uncreative way to automate a bookstore. Instead, he completely blew it up and reinvented the whole industry. And it took a while to figure that out and for that to percolate out. Similarly, with AI, we're going to have to rethink how these agents are doing work in a very different way. It can't just be replacing a person one for one. But ultimately, I think it's going to be bigger, and I'd be really disappointed if it was only as big as the internet boom. I think it's got the potential to be much bigger.
I guess it was about 10 years ago now, when you and Andy wrote The Second Machine Age. Right. You said something in there, you said, machines have always replaced humans, but this is the first time it's replaced humans in cognitive function. Of course, this is well ahead of the AI that was heard around the world.
Sure. Well, you and I talked about this in London when the book first came out, and the reason we call it the second machine age, we compared it to the Industrial Revolution, which really changed the course of history. For hundreds of years, thousands of years, the life of the average person just didn't change at all. It was just living almost in subsistence. And then when James Watt developed the steam engine, things started really taking off. And now we live in wealth compared to our ancestors a couple hundred years ago. But that was just augmenting our muscles and animal muscles. Now we have something that for the first time can augment our minds. And to me, how can that not be an even bigger deal? And so ultimately, I think we're going to have another inflection point that goes way beyond what the steam engine and the Industrial Revolution did.
So the Bezos analogy is a really interesting one because he is this revolutionary kind of entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Are today's organizations not thinking big enough in that sense, in that they're not necessarily reimagining how business and work gets done in the ways that you need to see this real impact?
Yeah. No, I see this all the time, and I've been trying to rail against it. And I don't blame people, because it's so much easier to look at things that are the way they are right now and say, okay, how can a machine do the same thing that the person's doing? It doesn't take much creativity to do that. And by the way, often you get some cost savings from that, so it's not like the worst thing to do. But ultimately, to imagine an entirely new kind of business, that takes a lot more creativity. I'm not surprised that it often takes years or decades to sort that out, but we're beginning to see some new kinds of organizations, some new businesses. Especially, I'm out in Silicon Valley now, and it's just amazing. Every time I go to a barbecue, someone's come up with some like eye-popping new idea that at first I think they're science fiction, but they're actually implementing them.
I want to come back to some comment you made about the steam engine.
Yeah.
So I feel like, and I'd like your perspectives on the hype. And I agree, it's like every new wave, the technology business grows bigger, but it seems like the physical world is still really important, and sometimes we forget about that. and I mean, I remember having to go to the library and look up microfiche. So I feel like the delta between that and Google search was actually greater than the delta between Google search and ChatGPT. And so, maybe not from an economic standpoint, but from a societal standpoint. How do you think about that?
And this is something I learned from Bob Gordon. He and I have these debates. He's a great economist, and he's been right about so many things, but he's kind of a pessimist. And he argued that, hey, the indoor plumbing and the flush toilet, penicillin, microfiche to internet, those were all really big changes too, and he's right. Sometimes I forget, I don't realize how big the changes were from our grandparents. So do credit, those were important, and I think the ones coming in will be comparably big, and no aspersions on what happened before. I do think ultimately though, if AI really realizes its promise, to augment and automate intelligence, then it may be literally the last invention we have to make, because it'll start inventing the new things. It'll start boosting R&D, and I just read about a company, Periodic AI, that's boosting scientific discovery. They've got AI driving robots, the physical world, doing experiments, learning things, and then we'll not just have a higher level of growth, but we'll have a higher rate of growth, and things will just, take off.
So you think the rate of growth can accelerate? I mean, what's the global GDP is what, 115 trillion, let's call it?
Yeah, about that.
Something like that. So I heard Michael Dell talking, they were asking him, are we spending, too much? And he was like, look, if we get 10% productivity increase, that's like over 10 trillion. We're not spending enough. Do you buy that argument?
Well, I don't think it would be interesting if there wasn't good arguments on both sides of it. So I think I can see that argument. If it actually becomes able to do a large percentage of cognitive work, that's worth more than $10 trillion, I mean, what percentage of cognitive work, of the GDP is cognitive work in the US? Probably at least half of it. And so you multiply that. On the other hand, that's a bet whether these things are going to pay off. And same thing with the internet. There was pets.com and Webvan, you remember those companies, and they crash and burns. There are other trillion-dollar companies created, so I think we're going to have the same thing. There's going to be bubbles that crash, but there's also some real value in there. As to whether we got the number exactly right today, I mean, I couldn't tell you. Maybe we're overshooting, maybe we're undershooting.
I would have said 6 months ago, we're not in a bubble. I'm not sure we are now. But we're starting to see similar signs to .com with the debt-laden companies and the circular references and so forth. But is that a natural phenomenon that will eventually work itself out?
I'm worried because you look at the sort of financial engineering that's going on in some of these companies where they are committing to buy chips and data centers that cost more than the revenue they have today, and they're doing these exotic financial instruments to do it. That usually doesn't end well. So I got to say, I am genuinely concerned, and if it does crash, it'll take down a lot of the economy with it. So I think we got to be careful, and there's no guarantee that all these things are going to pay off. I see the gold pot at the end of the rainbow right there, and it's worth trillions of dollars, but probably most of the companies that are investing in it right now are not going to be among the winners.
So right now we've been talking about how organizations will benefit and the overall economy, but I want to talk about the individual worker.
Yes.
In particular, the workers that you are teaching right now at Stanford. So these are soon to be newly minted college graduates and master's degrees. What are you, I mean, they're graduating with Stanford degrees, so I'm not too worried about them per se. And yet, there is a lot of concern.
Yeah.
There is a lot of
Maybe
concern.
you should be more worried about
No,
that.
I'm hearing that some of them are having trouble finding jobs. The job market is turning down some. They're using AI a lot in their classes, in my class, and like, I'm not going to stop them. I wouldn't want to, even if I could. But it means that I've had to reinvent my class significantly. The assignments that I've been using for 20 years, they don't work anymore. I take the same assignment, I put it into ChatGPT or Gemini, and I was like, hey, that's a pretty good answer. And I don't want the students to just do the same thing and never have it go through their brain. So I do different things. I cold call on them. Remember when you're in school and your teacher cold calls on you? And that helps a little bit, but I got 150 students, so it doesn't really scale. I came up with something that it seems to be working, which is I created an AI avatar of myself, believe it or not. So I trained it on all my writings and my videos, and I had the AI avatar reads the student's assignment, and then I tell every student, you have to spend 5 minutes live talking to my AI avatar after you turn in your assignment. So they do this video interview with them, and my AI avatar asks them all the questions that I would have asked them. Well, maybe not the same ones, I don't know what questions it's going to ask. Students actually like it. The funny thing about these Stanford students, they're such wonks. They're like, I was asking them how they were liking it, and they were saying, it's good, but it's too nice. It's not asking hard enough questions. I was like, okay, I can crank that up.
Dial that one up.
So this is what they're getting here in your class, but then they're graduating and not being able to get that sort of entry-level experience that they need, that creates that experienced and expert in the loop that we need later down the road.
Well, this is a real fear. We just did this paper, Canaries in the Coal Mine, where we looked at data from ADP, and I was kind of surprised to see how sharp some of the changes were in the labor market. What we found was that entry-level workers had falling employment in all the occupations that were most exposed, like software engineering, customer service, especially for workers aged like 22 to 26. They were the hardest hit. Interestingly, the more senior workers continued to have like a growing employment. And so this is a tough time. Like, where are you going to get those senior workers if they don't start off as entry workers? You can't not hire them. And so this is, the economy's going to go through some structural change as we sort of sort that out.
We were debating yesterday whether or not it's a crisis. Rebecca used that term, and I said, well, it was maybe worse in '82 and in '09, and then we did some more research, and it does appear that those entry-level jobs, the unemployment rate is higher than the average, which is rare, and the underemployment rate is up around, I think, 40% now versus sort of a normal 30%. Are we in a crisis, or are we headed toward one, do you think?
Well, I don't think it's a crisis yet. I mean, overall unemployment is still relatively low, and it's harder than it was, but there are definitely some warning signs on the horizon. If those trends that we identified in the ADP report continue or worsen, then it will eventually become a crisis. I want to put some perspective though, just to be fair, every new technology destroys jobs, creates jobs, people have to learn new things. We've all learned that once America had 90% farmers, and now it's like 2%. So it's not like we had 90% unemployment, they had jobs like us, and doing other things, so new things get discovered, but it takes a while to do that. It's one thing if you have decades or a century to do that. If it's happening over just a few years, that's a lot harder.
And in Second Machine Age, as I recall, you ended the book with a number of prescriptions from public policy perspective. Yes. So I'm interested what you think. Some of them, as I recall, related to tax policy maybe, and also training and things like that. How do you feel about the current public policy? I mean, obviously they're doing some good things to support business and support. Every CEO I talk to says, at least I can talk to this administration. Sorry, Rebecca. But taking ownership in companies and potentially picking winners. Do you have any point of view on the public policy posture today, positive, negative?
I do. I think we have to do a lot more. Looking back at the Second Machine Age, I'd say in many ways the technology went faster than I would have expected, not in every area, but just, I don't think anyone expected LLMs to be as powerful as they are. I was talking to Demis Hassabis, few people know more about the technology than him, and he said he was surprised. So if he's surprised, I don't blame myself for being surprised about it too. So that's great. On the other hand, in terms of our public policy, those prescriptions we had in the book, most of them have not been implemented. I don't think our workforce is ready. I don't think we've updated our tax policy. And so right now we have this big disconnect between amazing capabilities and our organizations, our institutions, our laws, our policies have barely changed at all, and in some ways have gone backwards. You know, a lot of economists are not thrilled with the way some of the policies that have been put in place that are not helping be more adaptable. Ultimately, we need a much more flexible workforce. We need to be able to retrain people. We need to have portable benefits so that people can move from job to job. And if we don't, that kind of crisis that we were talking about earlier, where old jobs disappear and people have to move to new jobs, isn't going to happen fast enough. So that gap between the capabilities and our organizations and institutions, that's where the big challenges and where the big opportunities lie for the next 5 to 10 years.
Do you have a point of view on US taxpayers taking ownership in companies?
Yeah, like most economists, that's kind of a socialist approach that most people hasn't worked out too well in most countries. And I'm kind of surprised that we're seeing that happening now. You want to have the dynamism, you want to be able to have companies rise and fall, some of them fail, some of them succeed. The marketplace will tend to sort that out. Now you want to invest in what we call public goods, education, R&D, infrastructure. Those are things that the government really should be investing in. But picking like specific companies and having winners and losers, that leads to what economists call rent seeking, that people are sort of like trying to win favor with policymakers and say, give us the money, give the money, see if you can chop down our competitor. That's kind of a zero-sum approach, and it's not been the way that America succeeded in the past, and I don't think it's going to be healthy going forward.
How about silicon, specifically advanced silicon manufacturing? Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you feel it's important to have a US-based headquartered company that is capable, or even a US domicile?
So that's one of the ones where I do think there's a role for public policy for two reasons. One, there's a national security aspect to it. These are dual-use technologies, and whether we like it or not, we have to maintain a competitive edge in those core technologies. We're not necessarily going to have more people in the army than some of our adversaries, but we could have better technology, but we have to make sure that it's not vulnerable to being shut down. Taiwan right now is very vulnerable, and that's where the chips are being made. So we want to reduce that vulnerability. Secondly, there is kind of a externality or spillover in that when you invest in chips, it enables a lot of other technologies. So it's kind of one of these core technologies, these general purpose technologies that spawns a lot of other things. And R&D in that area is something that is, pays dividends, and you want to, I think there's a good case for government support in that particular area.
So you'd be in favor of the CHIPS Act broadly, how it's applied, the nuances, or maybe a longer discussion?
Yeah, a lot of devil's in the details. Broadly, we want to support investment in new technologies, in R&D, especially the early stage of the technologies. It gets more developed, you leave that to the marketplace. So you want to invest in that general direction, absolutely. You want to be careful about crony capitalism where somebody who's a favor or friend or whatever is the one who's doing it. You want to do it based on these more infrastructure reasons.
Eric, what are you working on right now at Stanford that is lighting you up? Obviously, you're one of the world's most famous economists, and you're born at the right time in the sense of.
I know, it's an amazing time to be alive, isn't it? I mean, to be alive when machines are actually becoming intelligent, that's a really special time in history, one of the most important times in all of human history. So I love my job, I love what I'm doing. I'm working on agentic technology along with Di Yang and Yijia and a few others. We are looking at how agents can be used in the workplace, what kinds of tasks people want them to be working on and not working on. We're kind of walking the walk. Dee and these are the computer scientists that developed some agent technologies to go out and interview workers. I thought that was so cool. I used to do it myself or hire people, but now we have AI agents doing voice interviews and it's working incredibly well. Another thing we're working on is new measures of the economy. So we developed this measure called GDPB that measures the value that's created even if you don't pay for it. So Wikipedia or ChatGPT or Google, people get a ton of value from that, but they don't pay for it. As the economy becomes more and more digital, there's a huge amount of value being created that doesn't show up anywhere else in the statistics, so we're trying to measure that.
Try to quantify it, exactly.
And it's huge, it's hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars.
Silicon Valley, Boston, how are you finding? Is it a step up?
I grew up in Boston, the Boston area. I love that place. There's so many smart people, so many wonderful people. Frank Fay and I used to coach football together there. So I have such warm feelings. I still try to go back there. That said, Silicon Valley is it's where it's happening now. There's no place like it in the world. When I go to a barbecue, someone's telling me about like this, literally I was talking to someone who's talking about building a data center in space, and I'm like, oh wow, is that like in 2050, 2030? No, we're launching in 2 months. I'm like, holy shit, this is such a weird place. And of course the weather isn't too bad either.
Yeah, no, I would take it too. All right, so we're here at UiPath Fusion. What is when people stop you in the hall, they want to shake your hand, they want to hear what you're doing, what you're thinking, what's the advice that you're giving them about how they should be thinking about AI and these agentic era?
Well, the thing I've been focused on like all my life, and I kind of feel like now more than ever, is understanding how you can take these amazing technologies and turn them into business value. It's fun. I let my eyes widen when I hear about these cool technologies, and I'm glad that my very smart tech friends are inventing even more crazy things. But we got to convert that into something that's useful for businesses, useful for consumers, and unfortunately that's just not happening as fast as it could be. There are some examples of some big returns, but on average I think there's been some disappointment. If you look at the overall productivity statistics, they've barely budged. So we need to put more focus on identifying where is the business value created, how do I measure that, how do I make sure that this new technology is doing it. And I was at this hackathon and they were developing a bunch of cool things. They were using LLMs to come up with their new lunch menus, and I was like, guys, come on, is that your core business value?
We can do better than
exactly. So my company actually, I want to try and walk the walk. I started a company, Workhelix, with Andy McAfee and some others, and we're very focused on identifying where the business value is and showing companies how to map the technology onto those uses instead of just sort of spray and pray.
Excellent.
Yeah, you've always done some great work at the firm level, and that's really where it's all going to happen. So,
indeed.
And that'll affect the macro, I'm confident.
Eventually it'll work the macro. I think it's going to happen sooner now than it did with the computer age or the electricity age, but it's not going to happen unless we work really hard at it.
Indeed. Erik Brynjolfsson, always a pleasure having you on the show.
So good to see both of you again.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm Rebecca Knight for Dave Vellante. Stay tuned for more of theCUBE's live coverage of UiPath Fusion. You're watching theCUBE, the leader in enterprise tech news and analysis.